Hello again, everybody. Welcome to module number 2 of our Pre-Employment Transition Services training for VRS staff, which will be all about pre-ETS time charging. This again is Alyssa Klein, our VRS Transition and Pre-Employment Transition Services Specialist. This pre-ETS training module is the second in a series of 5 that were recorded in February of 2021. Here's our agenda for this training module. We'll review some background information related to pre-ETS time charging. We'll review the 3 time entry categories of Pre-ETS, AUTH, and VR Basic. We'll talk about entering time entry and expenses. We'll review how to use your Outlook calendar related to time charging, as well as state vehicle travel logs. So let's talk a little bit about background information. We had a slide similar to this in module number 1 when we reviewed the basics of pre-ETS. For the context of this time charging presentation, the reason we care, again, is that we need to spend 15% of our federal funds on pre-employment transition services, and the Federal Rehabilitation Services Administration wants to be sure that VR programs across the country are appropriately tracking funds charged to the pre-ETS budget. As a reminder, the pre-ETS desk aid is available and recommended for you to use. I would also recommend that you have a copy of the desk aid in front of you for this training. I have the pre-ETS desk aid linked on this slide. I'll also note that this desk aid had some minor revisions done in January of 2021. You'll see next to each of the pre-ETS time charging categories, there is a code. It will be one of the 3 pre-ETS time charging codes. So for instance, next to job exploration counseling, we have PETS. And then next to pre-ETS authorized services, we have AUTH. So why is this training not for pre-ETS representatives? It is because their time is primarily coded to the PETS code. So they have different time entry and expense defaults and different Outlook calendar instructions. They also do not provide services in support of pre-ETS, since those are only available to students who are on the regular VR caseload. So let's take a look at the 3 pre-ETS categories, which are PETS, AUTH, and VR Basic. Those 3 categories are listed here, and what's included in each is listed within each box. So PETS includes all of your time and expenses related to providing or arranging for pre-ETS required services, as well as pre-ETS coordination services, and services in support of pre-ETS. AUTH includes all of your time and expenses related to the items on the staff time charging expense reports items towards pre-ETS authorized services, which is linked on this slide. And then the remainder of your time would be VR Basic, and that includes all non-pre-ETS related activities. In other words, providing general VR services. It also includes administrative tasks, which RSA defines as preparing authorizations, uploading EDS documents into Workforce One, things that oftentimes our support staff are doing. Also, team meetings and any non-pre-ETS training would be coded to VR Basic as well. So these are the 3 categories as you would see them on your time entry and your expense reports. This training was recorded during our federal fiscal year 21, so you see the 21 at the end of each code. So for instance, PETS, the actual code is B22 VRBS PETS FY21. So you see the PETS within there. And the default for all staff would be at 0.08. AUTH, you'll see the AUTH listed within that longer code. and the default for AUTH is also 0.08. And then VR Basic, the default would be set at 7.84. I do need to note that there are some staff that have additional time entry categories, so your defaults might look a little different. But regardless, everybody needs to change the defaults to accurately reflect your time. You should never keep them at any of these times that are listed as the default on your time entry and your expenses. So I've circled here where you can find the 5 Pre-ETS required services on the desk aid. And again, all of those services, whether you're providing or you're arranging those services, would be charged as Pre-ETS. I'm going to say a little bit more about arranging for Pre-ETS required services. So arranging means to discuss, identify, plan, or schedule Pre-ETS activities for a specific student. It occurs in collaboration with the student, and it can include anyone else on that student's team, so their parents, their school supports, contracted community partners, etc. And it can be done individually or in a group setting. And here are some examples of arranging for Pre-ETS services which would be charged to your time entry as well. So it could be having informed choice discussions about available services, interests, and needs. It could be engaging the student's family in discussions and planning. It could be reviewing comparable services and benefits, scheduling or enrolling the student in services delivered by a provider, or any communications with the families or school staff and others on the team about anticipated Pre-ETS services that are going to be provided and coordinating the roles and responsibilities. So even if you're not directly providing that Pre-ETS service, but you're arranging for that service, make sure you're charging your time and expenses appropriately to the Pre-ETS budget. So next on the desk aid, we have Pre-ETS coordination services, which are in green, which would be Pre-ETS on your time entry and expenses as well. If you recall, Pre-ETS coordination services are these 4 specific activities. So attending an IEP meeting, developing work opportunities, working with educators to coordinate Pre-ETS, and attending person-centered planning meetings for students with waivers. I'll just say a few more words about each of those 4 coordination services, and the first being IEP meetings. Make sure you're charging all of your time at an IEP meeting to Pre-ETS, including your travel time. And also make sure that you recall that it can be whether you're talking about VRS services or providing services to somebody on your caseload or somebody who could be applying in the future. So even if you're coming in to talk about VRS services to a potential referral, you would still charge your time to Pre-ETS. And also as a side note, but it's really important because case note categories are how we let RSA know which services were provided to each student. So after you attend an IEP meeting, again, make sure that when you enter your case note, that you not only enter IEP meeting in the case note category, but also which of any of the 5 Pre-ETS required services you were providing or arranging for during that IEP meeting. You probably weren't providing many, but you may have or likely were discussing or arranging any of those 5 Pre-ETS services. So make sure that you enter those Pre-ETS case note categories as well. All right, the next area of coordination services is developing work opportunities. This includes time that you spend on planning with our local career force partners for students with disabilities. So that could be attending youth council meetings or any sort of planning meeting that you have, usually with our Title I partners of the career force system. Outreach to businesses related to students with disabilities. Oftentimes that will be the time that our placement coordinators and placement specialists spend working with employers, but it could be anyone. If you are spending time with an employer to talk about the possibility of a work experience or any sort of work-based learning experience, you'd want to charge your time. And it can also be about developing work experiences, job shadows, informational interviews, and any other type of work-based learning experience. The next coordination service is coordinating with educators. This can include meetings with high school staff to plan for how Pre-ETS will be delivered. So it's really more that broad service, just talking about all the students at the school and how they can refer students to you. And then any broad discussions about how students can have access to Pre-ETS. And then finally, attending person-centered planning meetings for students with waivers. I always find that one fascinating because it's so very specific. But basically, if it's a student on a waiver, Medicaid waiver through the county, and you're having a meeting to talk about person-centered planning, make sure you're charging your time to Pre-ETS as well. Pre-ETS authorized services, or AUTH, is the next category we'll review once again, and it's circled here on the desk aid. As was noted in our last module, we're allowed to charge time to AUTH when we have enough funds remaining after providing Pre-ETS required services to students. And there are 9 specific activities called out in WIOA under the category of Pre-ETS authorized services. But we made it easier for you by putting this list together, staff time expense charging items towards Pre-ETS authorized services. So it'll be important for you to get to know that document and remember to charge items that you that are on that list to AUTH on your time entry and expense report. And it also includes training that is approved by the VRS Learning and Development team, and we'll have this symbol located on the training announcement if it can be charged to AUTH. A little bit more about time and travel related to Pre-ETS authorized or AUTH training. So again, the Learning and Development team will announce specific training that can be charged to AUTH. Remember that these trainings luckily do not count towards your external professional development training per calendar year, which is $250, so it does not count towards that $250, and that they will tell you what percentage of your time and expenses can be charged to AUTH. And it'll either be 50% or 100%, depending on whether that training is exclusively related to students with disabilities or partially focused on students with disabilities. Here's an example of how the percentages will work. So the Autism Society of Minnesota Conference is being held for 2 full days, which would be 16 work hours. And the Learning and Development team indicated that 50% of the conference could be charged to Pre-ETS authorized services. So staff would charge 50% of their time, or 8 total hours, 4 hours each day, to Pre-ETS authorized services on their time entry. Calculate 50% of their mileage, meals, and lodging, and enter that accordingly to AUTH on your expense report. And then the remainder of that time would be charged to the VR Basic Fund. Services in support of Pre-ETS is circled on the desk aid here, and that time of providing or arranging for those services would also be charged to Pre-ETS. So as a reminder, we have the list of all the services in support of Pre-ETS. So just keep that in mind when you are doing your time entry to be sure that you're thinking of those things. In terms of providing a service that, again, is specifically in support of Pre-ETS only. and also for students who are eligible for VR only as well. Lastly, here's a slide that reviews all the things that are not charged to Pre-ETS and should be charged to VR Basic instead. So again, providing any regular VR service, any task related to VR services. So doing eligibility and priority for services decisions, doing your assessment of VR needs. Those are some examples. Any administrative tasks, so making copies, creating authorizations, uploading documents, perhaps creating or putting information together for a referral. Any of those things would be VR Basic. And then your team meetings or any non-Pre-ETS related trainings would also be charged to VR Basic. So entering your time entry and expenses. When you are in the time entry form on the self-service system, here's what all the codes will look like and what each one means. So the top code has the term PETS in it, and it's the code for Pre-ETS required, Pre-ETS coordination, and services in support of Pre-ETS. The second code has the VR Basic term in there, and of course that's anything that isn't Pre-ETS. And then the last is for Pre-ETS authorized services because we see the AUTH within it. And it will look exactly the same in terms of those codes on your expense report as well. So when it comes to calculating your travel expenses, know that the amount to charge to expenses is based on the amount of time you spend on each Pre-ETS or VR Basic activity. So here we have a mileage example. Let's say I spent 4 hours of my day at Anoka High School, the school I serve. Of course, this is during non-pandemic related circumstances. While I was there, I spent 1 hour in an IEP meeting, which would be Pre-ETS coordination services and charged within PETS. I also provided Pre-ETS required services in my individual meetings with students, which added up to 2 hours, also charged within PETS. And then in those same meetings with students, I provided regular VR services for a total of 1 hour. Let's say that I traveled 50 miles round trip to and from the high school from my office, and the mileage reimbursement at the 2021 IRS rate of 56 cents a mile totals $28. So the mileage reported on my expense form would look as follows. PETS was 75% of my time, so that equals 37.5 miles times 56 cents a mile, which is $21. VR Basic was the remaining 25% of my time, which was 12.5 miles, excuse me, times 56 cents a mile, or $7. So this is how it would look on my mileage expense page after clicking default labor. First, I added the $21 in the PETS line. Then I added the $7 in the VR Basic line. Of course, since I didn't have any Pre-ETS authorized services, I would then delete the AUTH line. I made this example simple, so I only recorded one trip here. Obviously, you would add up the mileage cost for all the trips you took within a time period and enter the totals collectively into your expense report. Also, I didn't touch on travel time in this example either, so remember that you would also divide out your travel time according to what you focused on in the appointments you traveled for. Here's an example for when you could be reimbursed for a meal. I travel to meet with students at Black Duck High School, which is 40 miles from my office. Note that 50% of my time there was focused on Pre-ETS required services, and 50% of my time was focused on regular VR services. Also, because the meetings that I went to was over 35 miles away, and because in this case I traveled over the lunch hour, I'm able to be reimbursed for my lunch, which came to the maximum reimbursement cost of $11. So here's how it would look on the meals and lodging page on my expense report after I clicked on default labor. Since 50% of my meeting was focused on pre-ETS required services, I enter in half the cost of my lunch, or $6.50, in the Pre-ETS line. And because the other half of my meeting was focused on regular VR services, I enter the other half of my lunch cost, or $6.50, in the VR basic line. Lastly, I would delete the pre-ETS authorized services line since my meeting did not include those services. Obviously, I would also have divided my mileage the same way. The round trip mileage was 80 miles, so 40 miles would be charged to pre-ETS required services, or Pre-ETS, and 40 miles would be charged to VR basic. Now let's review everybody's favorite topic, which is using your Outlook calendar to document your pre-ETS time charging. So again, when you're able to actually travel, this is what it would look like when you go out to high schools to meet with students. Afterwards, you'll need to go back into Outlook to document how much of your time was spent on pre-ETS required services and which students you provided the pre-ETS required services to. You'll want to use your the student's initials and document the amount of pre-ETS time. This slide gives you some examples from pre-ETS coordination services. The first example, related to developing work opportunities, is a meeting with the manager at Pete's Auto, where I was learning about the job openings he had. The second example is an IEP meeting for a possible student referral. The third is related to pre-ETS coordination services in terms of working with educators to coordinate pre-ETS. So you'll see that I documented a pre-ETS planning meeting that I had with the Anoka High School education staff. And then the last example is my documentation of a person-centered planning meeting with a student who has a Medicaid waiver. Again, be sure to include all of your travel time. The easiest way to indicate time on your Outlook calendar is to use the Categorize feature. This is a screenshot of the name of the categories I have chosen for each color. You'll see I chose blue for Pre-ETS and pink for pre-ETS authorized services. So here are two ways you could use the color coding rather than listing the name of the pre-ETS budget category. In the first example, which lists the 4 pre-ETS coordination services meetings that I recently reviewed, I just went in and used the Pre-ETS budget color, again I used blue, and then coded each meeting. In the second example, same meeting, but I just went in and entered one appointment with the proper color, again blue, and indicated how much time was spent on Pre-ETS during that time frame. Here's an example when you are at your desk catching up on casework. So you may spend a portion of your time entering case notes for students you provided pre-ETS required services to, which does count toward pre-ETS required services, or Pre-ETS, on your time entry. So again, you would just list the initials of the students you case noted on. And here's a few more notes related to case notes. Obviously, the reason for having the Outlook entry would be to denote which students' cases you worked on for that day. So for someone reviewing your case note, they could get more details about what occurred and why it was considered pre-ETS by reading those case notes. So here's an example for pre-ETS authorized services. My pre-ETS AUTH color is pink in my Outlook. So here again is the Autism Society Conference example. So you just want to include the percentage of the time that can be charged to pre-ETS authorized and the number of hours that you'll be charging to that budget. So I just listed Autism Society, 50% in 4 hours. That was for one day. Both days would probably look the same. And finally, this section will be pertaining to just those of you who have access to or will be using the state fleet vehicles. Of course, this was recorded during the COVID pandemic, so this will be when we're allowed to travel once again. You just need to make sure that you use the Pre-ETS codes for each trip you take that pertains to Pre-ETS. This is a screenshot of what the travel log looks like. So whenever you take a trip and it's related to either Pre-ETS or AUTH, make sure you enter those codes under the cost code section, which is circled here. And then at the end of each month, a label needs to be affixed to the travel log, which allows you to enter the total mileage for each of those two Pre-ETS categories. And then everything else is just charged to VR Basic. These logs must be scanned and then emailed to the two folks, Jerry and Michaela, that are listed here. You may not have to worry about this information on the slide if somebody else in your office takes care of that, but somebody needs to for each team. So ask your RAM about your office process for this. Let's finish up this module with another quiz. We have 10 questions on these next two slides, on slides 49 and 50. And you'll need to answer which time entry / expense code, either Pre-ETS, AUTH, or VR Basic, that each of these items should be charged to. So press pause, answer which of the codes that each would be charged to, and then press play and we'll review the answers. All right, let's review the answers. Number 1 says, attend an IEP meeting for a student who may apply for VRS. The answer here is Pre-ETS because this is a Pre-ETS coordination service. Number 2, you meet with the special education team at the beginning of the year to talk about coordination of Pre-ETS services. Once again, you'd be charging to Pre-ETS because this is another Pre-ETS coordination service. Number 3, you spend the day at a high school delivering VRS orientations. Most of the time when you're delivering orientations, you are talking about both Pre-ETS as well as VR Basic services. So the best practice is to charge 50% of your time to Pre-ETS and 50% of your time to VR Basic when you're doing orientations. Number 4, you meet with a 20-year-old college student to review their employment plan, CFP, and prepare for the next school year. So this would also most likely be a mix of Pre-ETS and VR Basic. So Pre-ETS post-secondary education counseling can include certain items related to helping students remain enrolled in post-secondary education. So then a portion of those meetings can count towards Pre-ETS. The time you spend reviewing the employment plan, doing CIF and CFP, are regular VR activities, so that would be charged to VR Basic. But you might also talk about the classes they're going to be enrolling in. You might do the FAFSA together or review career ideas related to the program they're in, so that time could be charged to Pre-ETS. Number 5, spend the afternoon updating case notes for high school students. Once again, that depends on whether you were updating case notes related to Pre-ETS or updating case notes related to regular VR services. So you would want to charge your time accordingly. Number 6, counsel a 19-year-old college student on alternative career options since they're struggling with classes. And that would be Pre-ETS to help them figure out what they're going to do. If they want to look at other career or post-secondary training options, that could be charged to Pre-ETS. Number 7, attend the VRS Transition 101 training. that would be AUTH. That would be an example of a training that would be announced by the VRS Learning and Development Team and would be at 100% AUTH. Number 8, meet with an employer to talk about job shadow opportunities for high school students. That is another Pre-ETS coordination service, and that would be charged to PETS. Number 9, meet with students to complete the FAFSA. That would be PETS. That can be included under post-secondary education counseling. And lastly, attend a mental health conference, and that would depend. We do often, annually there is the Children's Mental Health Conference, and that's all focused on young people with disabilities, so we are able to charge 100% of our time attending that one. But if there was another mental health conference that was partially related, focused on youth and partially focused on adults, then it would most likely be charged 50% AUTH. And that is the end of this training module. Again, consult with your manager if you have any questions, or certainly reach out to me. Thank you.